Hello racers! Today I'm going to bring you something that a lot of people was waiting for. So deck tech for the deck that we will be going to play in the current season. And it will be a Han deck, a new Han ECL, so green. Han Solo Worth the Risk is the leader from the Shadow of the Galaxy set that in our opinion will be the strongest competitive deck for this expansion. This deck performs incredibly well versus most matchups. It doesn't really have any matchup that is bad, so it's similar to Boba Green in set 1, that your worst matchup is about 50-50. So okay, let's go to see how the deck looks, and then I will explain every single card, combos, and potential upgrades for the future. Okay, so this is my white Han. And let's go through the list. We are playing a lot of 1-drops, like Maskanata, like R2, and we are trying to spread wide enough to overwhelm our opponent. So versus this deck, removal is pretty pointless, and because for every card I play, it's a small card that will deal a lot of damage, but I will definitely be playing more cards than my opponent during any turn. This deck also is incredible at drawing cards because of Mon Mothma and Bright Hope, and have really explosive turns when you deploy your leader. Okay, so let's go to the card by card analysis. So let's start with 1-drops. And the most important 1-drop in the deck is Maskanata. With Perfect Hand, you can put basically 6 power on board, because you use Maskanata as your turn 1 play, you play R2 or Clone Deserter with Han's ability for free, and then you add any other 1-drop. Maskanata is a 3/3, and Reckless Gunslinger plus R2 bring another 3 power, and you end up with 6 power on turn 1. And if your opponent didn't go for ground, so basically play the space unit on turn 1, next turn you can play additional 2 units and attack for 7. And games like this tend to end in turn 3, turn 4. But even in the late game, Maskanata is a really amazing card, because for a 1-drop that needs to be dealt with, it's something that doesn't really have any competition. Because even if you play her on turn 4, so when you're having 5 resources, when a hand develops, if your opponent don't deal with her immediately, she will grow really fast. And just because of this, it's one of the cards that you should almost never consider resourcing if you have. Unless you draw more than 1, or you have something that is really good to play as well on turn 1. So for the other 1-drops, Reckless Gunslinger is amazing for 2 reasons. It gives you a little bit of reach because of the 1 damage to each base, but the bigger part is the smuggle, because this deck tends to run out of cards, so smuggle cards are really important. And the fact that you can play her for free is not that expensive, so that it hurts, and an additional body on the board is always something good. A Clone Deserter is a card that I underestimated at the beginning of the set. I think, especially in Han, this card performs extremely well because of the Restore 1. And because that you can play him basically for 0 as a 2/1, in addition to other things, so you can avoid Power of the Dark Side. If you have something like, if you play a Poe on turn 5, you can play Clone Deserter for free, and he's basically safe for some part of the removal that your opponent may play. Restore 1 is really important because the deck tends to race at some point, and even though it's only Restore 1, It's basically a swing for free, and for a 0-cost minion, it's really, really big. And lastly, we have really the card that was slept on for the half of the first set, but then people realized how strong it is, and R2 is even stronger in this deck, because playing him for 0 as a 1-2, and the ability to fix your top deck. So whenever you play him and whenever he attacks, you can look at the top card of your deck and you can put it on the bottom. And just this ability, especially in this deck, is really important. Because you will be trying to assemble some pieces together. Or later you will try to remove some cards from the top of your deck, like drawing Clone Deserter in turn 5. It's not that great, but because of the fact that we can modify our top decks, it's rarer to encounter bad draws or bad top decks. Okay, so let's go for the 2-drops. 2-drops are actually really similar for the 2-drops that were played on set 1. So the best 2-drop in the deck is by far Battlefield Marine. It can be played as a turn 1, as a 3/3. It will mostly trade with any other minion your opponent plays. It can be played as a 3/1 for 1, which is really strong. Later or even early with Maz, because you can play Maz Kanata and Battlefield Marine on turn 1, and you have 5 power on the board. And because of the fact that Maz can be played with many minions in this deck, she's really reliable. You don't really blank on her. But Battlefield Marine is still one of the best turn 1 plays in the game. And in this deck, he is even stronger because of the versatility to be played with other minions. The same goes with Sabine Wren. She's basically a Battlefield Marine with a downside and an upside at the same time. Because the downside is that if your opponent plays a 3/3 minion on turn 1 and they have initiative, Sabine will die. But the upside is that she can remove shield or kill something and deal the damage to the base. So she is a really, really powerful minion, and in this deck, her ability to not be attacked comes so often, and it's so annoying for our opponents that for me, she is one of the most annoying cards to play against. Next, we have Ketsu Onyo. We are playing only one copy in the main and another copy in the sideboard, but this card, she performs amazingly well in certain matchups. The Saboteur, the ability to remove shields or go around Sentinels is one part, but the ability to remove upgrades that cost 2, in certain matchups, it's basically a game ender. So versus Bosk, versus Kira, when you can remove the shield, this card performs really, really above what we expected. So that's why we are playing one copy in the main and another copy in the sideboard. The stats are good, but they are not amazing because 2 HP means that we can't play her with the Han's ability. And if she were a 2/3 minion, it would be a 3-off in the deck. But sadly, because of the fact that we don't really want to play a lot of minions that cannot be played with the ability, Ketsu is the only card that is strong enough to be played even though she has only 2 HP. And then we have 2 cards that didn't really see much play in set 1. And one is the new card from the set 2. So Mon Mothma, she was a little bit too expensive in set 1. 2 mana to search a card was not really what you wanted, and there wasn't really a deck that really ran out of cards. So I think the only deck that played her in set 1 was Han. And even with Han, people started to skip her in the later portions of the set. But I'm talking about the old Han. But in this set, with the new Han, with the young Han or wide Han, she is extremely powerful. Playing her for 1 mana as a body and being able to find rebels, and most powerful cards in this set are not rebels, because neither Poe nor Wrecker are rebels, but K2, Red 3, Battlefield Marine, Sabine Wren are still a really strong card to find, and there is also one card that is really important, and it's Bright Hope, that can be found with Mon Mothma. And in certain matchups, you really want a specific card to answer what's going on the board. And for 1 mana and a body, it's really a powerful tool that the deck has to offer. And lastly, the new card from the set, so a Heroic Renegade, a 2 mana 2/3 Grit. And in this deck, it's basically a 1 mana 4/1 minion. And for 1 mana, it's explosive. If you play him on turn 1 with Maz or with other 1-drop, and your opponent doesn't answer, the games tend to really end quickly. And this is not really an aggro deck. This deck works more like a zoo from Hearthstone. So you draw a lot of cards, you play a lot of minions, you trade efficiently, but you also have an ability to end the game really quickly if you want to. Okay, so let's go for the 3-drops, and for me, those minions are the most important in the deck. And especially Cassian Andor, so a card from the new set. And Cassian is extremely strong card. I think he may be the strongest heroic card that was added in the game. Of course, he competes with Wrecker, he competes with Poe, but his versatility and the ability to be played on almost any mana means that you're never unhappy to draw him. He can be played on turn 1 as a 3/3, and as you know, Battlefield Marine is an amazing turn 1 play, so Cassian is an amazing turn 1 play. You can play him on turn 2 as a 3/5 or as a 3/3 and add something to him, which is really 3/5 is an amazing stat line. Boba on the first set showed that just 5 HP on the second turn means that it's really hard to remove. And in addition to this, you can play him on 5 mana from Smuggle, and he enters ready. And this is the most important part. This is the most often you will play Cassian in Han is with a Smuggle ability, because you will run out of cards when you have 5 resource, and then you will be able to play him from Smuggle and restore cards, because you will no longer need to use your hand to still put threats on the board. And 3/5 ready makes that you can trade really efficiently or go face and surprise your opponent. Then we have someone who finally have a place to shine, so Admiral Akbar. Akbar in this deck, as many of the cards that were too slow before, is amazing, because playing him for 2 mana, his stats are really irrelevant. His ability is what makes him amazing. So in this deck, you go wide, so you have a really big amount of minions. And Akbar in turn 2, turn 3 can shoot for 5-6 damage. So you will basically be playing a 2 mana, remove a minion, put a body, and as I said before, Restore 1 is something that you shouldn't really diminish, because during the turns, your opponent don't really want to remove him, because he will need to spend resources to remove him, but if he don't remove him, you can just ping for 1, restore 1, ping for 1, restore 1, or you can bring him back with Bright Hope and do it again. So in this deck, he's one of my favorite minions. We are playing 2 in the main, mostly because he's a unique minion. He needs a specific board states to be amazing, so you don't really want to draw too many of him. But because of the fact that you can find him with Mon Mothma, and the fact that this deck draws really big amount of cards, 2 is enough. But we are playing the third one in the sideboard just for the possibility of playing him versus more aggressive decks. And then we have 2 cards that were like staples in set 1, so Echo-based Defender. We are mostly playing him because he's the only reasonable early Sentinel that can be played for 2 mana, can be played for 3 mana, is a rebel, so you can find him with Mon Mothma. This card performs really well in this deck. mostly because of the fact that it's Sentinel and has 4 attack. So it needs to be dealt with, and your opponent will need to attack into him. He really slows down Sabine enough, because Sabine will not be able to kill him with just Sabine on turn 3. And 4 attack will close the games quickly. So it's really good, like a piece of the puzzle. He's also an amazing turn 2 play if you manage to do the obnoxious turn 1 Maskanata play, because then it will be really hard to remove Maskanata from your opponent, and Mas can grow to an enormous levels if she is behind Sentinels. And Red 3. Red 3 is an amazing card. It was an amazing card, and in this deck it's absurd. It needs to be removed instantly, and if it's not, now your Akbar, your Heroic Renegades, your Cassian deal 1 additional damage, and 1 additional damage is a lot. Especially in the deck that puts these much minions on the board, the additional damage is just absurd. This card can make turns that your opponent feels they are safe, because it's impossible that he will deal 6 additional damage to me this turn. Then you play Red 3 and it's suddenly, oh no, I lost. And the fact that you can play him for 2 mana, yeah, he will be much more easily to remove, but playing him for 2 mana in the later stages of the game, this card still will need to be removed from your opponent, and if they don't have space units, they will still need to use removal. And then 3 mana or 1 mana doesn't really matter, but the 3 HP, 2 HP doesn't really matter, but that 1 mana matters a lot, because you can then play 2 or 3 additional cards with him. Okay, and then let's go to the endgame part of our deck. So 4 to 6 cost minions. We only play 5 cards that are not a turn 1 play, because every card before those we could play as a turn 1. So this deck, it's almost impossible to not have a turn 1 play. It's extremely consistent to always put and use all your mana every single turn, and that's why it's such an amazingly strong deck. But when we do go to later stages, we have something that this set brought that we didn't have in the set 1. So the power on 5 and 6 mana that this deck have is just absurd, and on every single level. So for 4 mana plays, we have K2 and Bright Hope. K2, we don't really need to talk much about him. He's, I think, the best 4-drop in the game. It's a 4/4 minion with Overwhelm, and if he dies, you either deal 3 damage or discard the card from your opponent. Both those options are really strong. He is really good with just ending the game, but even playing him on turn 3 or turn 2, because you can play him as a 4/2 on 3 mana, which is just sometimes just stupid. The amount of damage that he deals then, but he performs similar to what he did in Sabine. He's just the really efficient minion to play. He will always go at for 2/1 or a 3/1 or just 7 damage to the base. And Bright Hope. Bright Hope was a card that was trying to stop some decks in the set 1. In this deck, this card just do much more. You can play as many cards for 1 Tripper. For a 3 mana 2/4 Sentinel is still a really good card. That actually it doesn't really have any better Sentinel in space in these colors, but the fact that you can bring a card back to your hand and draw a card, this is the part that shines in the deck, because you can play R2D2, you can play Bright Hope on 3, bring back the R2D2, draw a card, and it basically costs you 0 mana. So you can play the R2D2 without the damage the next turn, or with the damage for free. any enter the battlefield effect, and there is quite a few of them in the deck, works again. So Bright Hope is an amazing tool, and when you fit all the puzzles together, you will see how obnoxious the amount of draw and amount of cards you play are. And then we go to the big guns in the deck. So Poe Dameron, I think it's by far the most polarizing card in set 2. He can be absurdly strong, and with ECL, if he can attack immediately, he is the strongest card in the game. Without ECL, 5 mana 6/6 is still a decent play. 4 mana 6/4 is even better sometimes. And his ability to attack and do 3 things, so you can deal 2 damage to a unit or base, defeat an upgrade, or discard a card for your opponent. Each of those will cost you a card, but we are drawing so many cards in the deck that it's really easy to play Poe and discard 3 cards sometimes, because even if you discard all your cards from your hand while attacking with Poe, the next turn you draw 2. You don't really need to resource past 5. You only resource past 5 for one specific reason that we will be talking in a moment. And for 5 you can play Cassian from resource and R2 from hand for 3, and suddenly you didn't really lose anything by discarding 3 cards. He counters a lot of answers to our deck, so he can kill almost every single leader with ECL. He counters Traitorous. He counters almost any upgrades in the game. And if your opponent is also playing a deck that uses a lot of cards, you can attack with him, discard the cards from your opponent, and if they are top decking and they are resource, they will only have 1 card in your hand, and sometimes the discarding is the best thing to do with him. So we are playing 3 Poe Damerons, and we are playing 1 copy of IG. Copy of IG is mostly because you want to consistently draw a card that can be ECL'd on turn 4, so when you are having 5 resource. And IGD performed really above what I've expected from him. He kills a lot of leaders that this deck struggle against, like Bosk. He kills Ray. He's not killing the Bobas, but because we are playing such a big amount of minions, we can attack a small minion into Boba, then we can ECL IG, and his ability to deal 3 damage to a ground unit is really relevant. It will most often happen just because of how many 1 and 2 attack minions we have in the deck. So he's basically the additional Poe, a weaker one, but still strong enough to be played. And then on 6 mana we have Wrecker. He's the only reason to go to 6 resources in the deck. You can play him for 5, and he's amazing for 5. The fact that he will lose you a resource doesn't really matter, because if you lose a resource, you go to 4, then on the next turn you resource to 5, you can play every single card in your deck for 5 resource, you don't really need anything more, and you only put a 6th resource when you want to ECL him, and he is the best target for ECL in the game. Because he, basically if your opponent has a leader that has 6 or 7 health, you can use his ability, kill something and kill the leader, or you can use his ability to ping the leader and then push 5 or 6 damage to the base. And 5-6 damage to the base is absurd from hand. So he's killing, with ECL, he kills every single leader in the game, even Jabba's, Palpatine's, or any other obnoxious late game leaders. He kills any other leader without his ability, and he also can kill another unit with it. So Wrecker is strong, Wrecker with ECL is stronger, and Wrecker in this deck is absurd. Okay, events. We are playing only 1 event in the deck, and it's mostly because we want to play units. We want to use the Han ability. We don't want to be stuck with cards we cannot play. So we are playing Heroic Sacrifice because it does two things. It draws you a card, which is really important, and it transforms any small minion into a threat that can be traded off. So basically, if you play Mon Mothma on turn 1, on turn 2 you can play Heroic Sacrifice, trade with an opponent 3/3, and then you basically drew two cards, one from Mon Mothma, one from Heroic Sacrifice, and you went really beyond the value on the trade. And of course it can finish the game with K2 for 9 damage, you can attack with Poe and Heroic Sacrifice for 10 damage, or with Wrecker for 9. So during the later stages of the game it's just a finisher. It's a really efficient card, and for 1 mana that can be really easily fit into the curve. It's just the event that you want to play. And for us, there really isn't any more events you want to play in the main deck. Of course, this may change, but for now, I'm always keeping to 3 Heroic Sacrifices, and I will not lower it. I think you can play 2, and it will still be fine, but I'm never unhappy when I drew Heroic Sacrifice, because even if you don't have anything to do, you can always just play it for 1 mana and draw a card. And in this deck it's still okay. Losing 1 resource is not that big of a deal in Han. So that's why this is the only event we are playing. So let's talk about the sideboard cards that are not in the main deck. And not in the main deck are 2 cards. It's our home one and Daring Raid. Those 2 cards perform very well, but only versus certain matchups. So home one you want to bring versus the slower matchups. So the Old Han, the Kiras, the Palpatines, or decks that go past turn 7. And home one is just a card that can single-handedly win you the game, especially in Han when you can play it for 7 resources. And for 7 resources you bring a 7/5 Restore 2 ship and a 3-drop, so most likely Cassian, from a discard pile. And this is the swing that not many decks can handle, so that's why we are playing 2 copies and maybe even 3 copies in the sideboard of home one. And Daring Raid is just an answer to Sabine and the decks that play a lot of minions that will easily die. You don't want to play this in your main deck because versus some matchups this card doesn't really perform well. So versus slow decks, 2 damage to the base is okay, but Han doesn't really want to end the game in this fashion. And you already have gunslingers to close the later stages of the game with pings. But versus center matchups, Daring Raid is so strong that you can't really not play him. So versus Tarkin, it's really strong to kill his early aggression. Or versus decks that play, like even versus Kira, this card performs okay because she often ends up on 7 damage when she deploys and kills something with 3 attack, like our leader. Then we can just Daring Raid her and be done with her. So okay, and now let's go to the biggest part: cards that we are considering adding to the deck later. Because dependence on the meta, there is a lot of cards that you can add. This is some of them. And I will go quickly versus some that are more controversial or more interesting. So timely intervention is okay, but you don't really have time to play it. You much more rather play 2 minions than ambush one of them. But it's really strong versus Sabine, and if Sabine becomes a really big problem in the meta, you may playing timely intervention in the sideboard, and if the Sabine will be like the strongest, the most annoying deck, you may even play a copy in the main board. Then we are having C3PO. C3PO is a 2-drop that draws you a card if you guess the cost of it. In the main deck we are having 15 1-drops and 15 2-drops. So you have about 30% chance to guess. We are also playing R2, so it's a good combo. And it's the only deck in the game that can play R2 and C3PO consistently on turn 1 without losing, because yeah, old Han could do it as well, but he would lose a card for it, and this deck doesn't. And C3PO for 1 mana is a really strong card, but because I don't think there will be that many control players in this set, we are not having him in the main board as of now, but he may be brought back because he performed really well versus certain matchups, but I don't think those matchups are that often as of now. Then we are having For the Cause I Believe In. For the Cause I Believe In is a card that I don't really think will be added to the deck ever, but it's still a consideration if we will be in the meta that you're always lacking like the last 2, 3, 4 damage. Then you can play For the Cause I Believe In. Almost any card in the deck is heroic, so it seems like a perfect fit, but we prefer to play minions over events. So for 3 mana, I would always prefer to play K2 or Maskanata and 2 other minions. That's why For the Cause I Believe In was mostly a dead card in most matchups. That's why we removed it completely from the deck. Now we have the Fleet Lieutenants, Wing Leaders, and Dodonas. So you can build this deck as a Rebel Han, and it will perform really well. In our testing, we just discovered that it was more risky. So it was much more explosive, but more risky, less consistent. That's why we preferred the version that we created from the Rebel version, but a lot of people may still play or try the Rebel version because it feels much more like playing Sabine, but it's better than Sabine, at least in my opinion. Sandari Peacekeeper is a card that is really versatile versus decks that want to race. So if you're racing with your opponent, this card is really amazing. We are not having this card right now because it's too easy to be killed. So one attack in the front means that a lot of cards that can trade for free, and then it's a really negative experience. And we don't really want to play cards that if they are answered, you can lose the game. So that's why, as of now, we are not having any in the deck, but it's still a good answer to Sabine, it's still a good answer to Tarkin, and it may end up in the deck later. Fang is here because if the upgrade becomes really obnoxious, you can consider him, but you have Poe in the deck, so it's much more reliable to just use Poe for an upgrade removal, but you can still have in the back of your head that, yeah, I can always add Fang if the upgrade becomes more annoying. Now we have Tech. Tech is a card that seems really good in this deck because you can play him for 2 mana as a 2/3. At 2/3 is not that bad. It will be the worst possible play for this deck in turn 1, but it's still okay. And his ability to play cards from Smuggle is really good, and is especially good in this deck because you run out of cards, but even though you are running out of cards, you still always have something to play because of Cassian, because of Gunslingers, and in our testing, Tech didn't really perform that great. It was really good in some matchups, and it was really bad in others, so we, as of now, decided to not put him even in the sideboard. But if the meta change, if the meta evolves into something that we will be seeing a lot more slow control-y matchups, he may be brought back. And now we have 3 cards that are a specific answer to aggro. So Modded Cohort, if the aggro becomes a problem, you can add her. She's okay, she's not amazing. It's just a 4/4 ambush card. It trades okay, and it will be a fine addition if needed. Rule with Respect is a fun card. Versus some decks, this card is extremely strong. Versus others, it's extremely useless. But I added it here just because there may be a meta when this card shines, and it's good to just not dismiss it at the beginning just because it doesn't perform now. Now there's a card that most people dismiss as a limited card or even not really great limited card. So Hunting Nexu, it's a 4-mana 4/4, and if you have another red card, aggression card, it gains rate 2. This card is here only for one reason, and it's Sabine. And because it's the only 4-drop in these colors that can kill Sabine with ECL instantly. Having another red card is not really that big of a deal in the deck, and it's a really fun answer to Sabine, so I just wanted to add it. I tested it a little bit and it performed better than I expected. It can be played or turned through as a 4/2 that attacks for 6. It's not amazing, but it feels it is the only card that kills a 5 HP minion from ECL that easily. So it's a fun consideration, and if your meta in your local tournaments are mostly Sabines, you should just add him. He will perform really well versus Sabine. And now we are going to the later, like the expensive cards. Traitorous is a card that will mostly be played if Tarkin becomes a problem. So this card answers Tarkin really well, and there isn't really any other deck that it performs amazing, so it's mostly if the Tarkin becomes a problem. Then we have the Desperate Traitor that is amazing, but we are not playing that much space. And we don't really want to play that much space because Han is mostly a ground deck. And splitting your resources into 2 arenas is not what you really want to do. But if there will be a lot of space decks, you might need to play Freighter just to answer them. And 5/6 for 5 mana is okay. 5/4 for 4 mana is amazing. So this card is still a really good addition. Gorilla Attack Pod was a card that I hated in set 1. I thought it was terrible and people shouldn't play it in Sabine. And as the meta progressed, more people saw that this card doesn't really perform that much better than the other later cards, and it's really easy to answer. But in Han, because you can play it for 5 mana as a 6/4 that can attack instantly, it's okay. We are not running it in the deck just because Poe and Wrecker are better. Better at every stage and better and at every possible way than Gorilla Attack Pod. So that's I just wanted to add it here just to say it's not the card that is really good in the deck, and I don't really see a version that really runs it efficiently. Riken is a card that is for me a little bit too unreliable to play. So the fact that he only gives the Sentinel for the turn, and if your opponent has a lethal, he will just take initiative and kill you, is really bad. But the fact that you can ECL him and he deals 6 damage, and just his stats are strong enough to be considered, and if you need more 6 drops in the deck, he is one of the better ones to add. And now the late game, so Mace Windu, Walker, and Kriat. I don't know what would need to happen to the meta to consider those cards, because we are not really running Ramp, because Ramp in Han is terrible. You much prefer to play just a lot of minions than Ramp and let your opponent dominate the ground, because you don't really have a greatest way to recover from that. That's why expensive minions are really hard to play, but if hard controls becomes a thing, again, you can consider adding walkers and crab dragons, or Mace Windu just to finish the game. I think Mace is a terrible card, but in Han, he may be strong enough to play. 6 mana 5/5 ambush that will untap is fine. I still think he's a little bit underpowered, but he may be good enough, but not now. I don't think now is the time for him. Okay, and I will also add that there is still a lot of more cards that can be considered for the deck. And this is also one of the parts why we decided to play it, because this deck will adapt really fast to what happens in the meta, and it have an answer for almost everything that there is and there will be in the decks that your opponents will play. Okay, so final thoughts. For me, this is the best heroic command deck in the game, and it's also the best deck in the game at the moment. Maz Kanata and Poe Dameron gives you an amazing early game and an amazing late game. The ECL is even stronger than it was in set 1. The Han's ability is absurd. The fact that you will always use all of your mana, you will never miss a single play, means that if your opponent's deck are not having their best draw, you will win by default. And if you are having your best draw, it's almost unbeatable. The fact that Han's ability when he deploys, you can use it more than one. On 5 mana you can have turns that are just borderline overpowered. So there was a game that I played. My opponent played Blast. I was on 7 resources. I had 5 cards in my hand. I deployed Han because I didn't have a really good moment to deploy him before, and I've played 5 of my cards, drew 2, and my opponent cleared my board again with Blast on the next turn, and then I played 4 cards from my hand, and that just dominated the game. And it happens a lot with this deck. You can play more cards than your opponent will even draw during 4 or 5 turns. So yeah, this is the deck. The deck list will be in the comments. I really encourage you guys to say what cards you will add to the deck if you play him, and if you test it, in what version do you play. There is also a RAM version of the deck. I think the RAM version is terrible, and compared to this one is just bad. But some people may still want to make an explosive turn for Crab Dragon plays. And please write in the comments what card you would add or remove from the deck. And at the beginning of the next week, I will also make a video playing it on Tabletop Simulator or on Karabast to showcase how strong and absurd this deck is. Thank you. Bye.